now. And some of my assignments, just real quick, so you understand overseas, I've been to Colombia, Uganda, Swaziland, Iraq, and Bosnia. So half my assignments have been domestic and half have been overseas. So diplomatic security is the federal law enforcement branch for the U.S. Department of State. There's approximately 2,100 agents. Again, we serve domestic and overseas. And when you compare that to the FBI, who has about 14,000 and they're domestic, you can see that 2,000 really isn't that much when we span the whole globe. Our three primary responsibilities within diplomatic security is we cover criminal investigations, specifically visa and passport fraud is where we get our legal statute for investigations. We do an array of protection similar to Secret Service, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then overseas, we're in the embassies and the consulates as regional security officers or RSOs. So thankfully, there's 3 DS agents on this panel, including myself. I'll cover protection. Tony, who's in one of the resident offices, he will cover investigations. And then Logan, who's in Cambodia, 2 o'clock in the morning right now for him, he will cover working in the RSO office. So just a little bit of history about diplomatic security. We got our start back in 1916 during World War I. We're actually called the Bureau of Secret Intelligence. Back then it was just 9 agents. We have evolved ever since then. And in 1985, we were codified by Congress as a diplomatic security service and with federal law enforcement authorities. And even back in 1985, there were roughly 500, 600 agents. When I came on 22 years ago, there were about 900. And now we're up to, like I said, about 2,100. So again, divided almost down the middle between about 1,000 overseas and 1,000 domestic. So we currently have about 30 offices throughout the United States where we conduct the criminal investigations. And then up here in DC, where I'm at, we have our headquarters office that supports both overseas and domestic. And one of those offices that's here in headquarters that I just wanted to highlight real quick is called the Rewards for Justice. A lot of people think this is FBI or a DEA program, but it's where we offer awards for information leading to terrorist attacks or terrorists that we're looking for. I'm holding up right now. You can see this matchbox. This is an old one. It had Bin Laden on it. But this is one that, before the 9/11 World Trade Center back in '93, Ramzi Youssef tried to take down the World Trade Centers with a van IED in the basement. And he's since fled and he was in Pakistan. And diplomatic security issued a very similar matchbox in Islamabad, and somebody found it and called the embassy and said, Ramzi Youssef is actually out here outside of Islamabad, and a couple of DS agents and a DEA agent went and actually apprehended Ramzi Youssef. So just a little success story for us on the Rewards for Justice program, something that most people don't really realize that it's something that we do. So I mentioned overseas, we're considered regional security officers. So we're at all the embassies and consulates. We are the senior law enforcement and security advisors to the ambassador, and we're responsible for the protection of all personnel, information, and facilities abroad. So anything that has anything to do with law enforcement or security in an overseas environment, diplomatic security is ultimately responsible for that. So as I mentioned, I would touch on protection for this portion of the chat. So just a little bit of background, we share responsibilities with the U.S. Secret Service. So a lot of times you may be seeing a protective detail and you think it's the Secret Service, but actually it's diplomatic security. So the way we split the responsibilities is the U.S. Secret Service is responsible for all heads of state that would come to the United States, and diplomatic security covers everyone else. So foreign ministers, visiting dignitaries, just some examples of ones that I've protected in the past. One of my first details was 3 weeks with the Dalai Lama in New York and Indiana, Yasser Arafat, Nelson Mandela, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Kofi Annan, who oversaw the UN. So some of those are currently, like Benjamin Netanyahu, he's currently the prime minister for Israel. But when he was not, and he would come visit to the United States, we would pick up those responsibilities. So if the Queen of England comes to visit, Secret Service will pick him up. But like when Prince Harry, before he relinquished a lot of his titles, diplomatic security would come and provide the protection for him. So overseas, we oversee the protective details for the ambassadors, for congressional delegations when they come to visit, and we facilitate the president and the vice president when they visit overseas. We help the Secret Service facilitate that responsibility. Other major events that we partake in, I mentioned the UNGA, but also for the Olympics. 2 years out, we will send 2 DS agents to that country that will be hosting the Olympics. And then we will take care of all the security arrangements on behalf of the US teams and the facilities. And as it gets closer, we could send upwards to 100 or 200 agents, depending on the event. Same with the World Cup. I was in Swaziland, which is Eswatini now, very small country right next to South Africa. And I was there when they had the World Cup there as well. So we had a couple hundred DS agents out there that were helping out. We also do protective details during the summits for the G7, G20, and the APAC. A little bit about specifically the office that I oversee right now is the mobile security deployments. So I literally oversee tactical and crisis response teams. So my MSD teams are one of 9 federally recognized tactical teams in the United States, along with HRT, Hostage Rescue Team with the FBI. However, we are the only tactical team that has a mandate for response to overseas. So if there's an embassy in crisis, if there's an embassy under threat, if there's a threat against an ambassador, we send our teams out, and then they help reinforce the compound. Sometimes we work in conjunction with a lot of our special operations personnel overseas as well. So my teams are always on standby, and we have like a recall, 12-hour recall where they have to be ready to go. But we've been able to do that within 4 hours, where we have the teams ready to deploy overseas. So we operate in a lot of austere environments. Could be natural disaster, could be a man-made disaster. My teams also have the capability to operate in those environments and render assistance in collapsed structures to recover personnel if no other subject matter experts are available to help out. In addition to all the training that DS agents get when you come over to MSD, you get 6 months of enhanced skill set training, which is advanced weapons, advanced driving, advanced medical. You go through escape and evasion, survival training as well. So again, our guys, you can drop them in any country at any time, and they'll be self-sustaining for very short periods of time to help out with the threat that's happening. Just an example, I know I have about a minute left, just real quick with the presidential inauguration, because of all the threats that were going on. All 9 of my teams were used to help out, because that included an incoming Secretary of State, an outgoing Secretary of State, and also 300 foreign diplomats that needed to be escorted under security umbrella that we provided up to the Capitol. So I will leave it at that. I got about 40 seconds left, but I don't want to rush anything through. So I'll go ahead and I'll give my time up to Tony. So thank you. Tony, it's over to you.
All right, thank you. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Well, first off, where do I start? I was a former UW-Madison alumnus back in 1990 when I graduated there. After I finished my school at UW-Madison, I went overseas to work at one of the Southeast Asian and American refugee camps in the Philippines. I spent about 3 years there between different camps. I was a former refugee who used to stay there years ago before I immigrated to the US. So coming back there, it was a sweet opportunity for me personally, but professionally, I was able to get back to community, refugee community overall. And then after that, I came back to the stateside. We settled in California, San Jose, California. I continue doing my community work and police work. I joined San Jose PD to work with the PD as far as dealing with the Vietnamese population in San Jose, which is the largest Vietnamese population in the nation. Just in case you need to know. So during my time there, I then after 6 years with San Jose PD, I ended up signing up with DS. And I've been with DS about 18 years and a half now. I have served, I have been assigned overseas 4 times in Angola, China, Slovakia, and Taipei was my last overseas assignment. And domestically, I've been assigned to New York field office, headquarters, and then Greensboro, which is my 3rd one. And this summer, I'm heading back to headquarters to finish my next and last assignment before retirement. Wow, time flies indeed. During my 18 years and a half with DS, like Kevin had mentioned before, we have different responsibility while we are overseas or at home. Back in Greensboro right now, I'm currently assigned as the resident agent in charge for Greensboro resident office since August of 2019. So coming up to almost 2 years down here. So basically our time, conduct, I manage an office of about 5 agents and 2 investigative specialists. We conduct criminal investigation, protect foreign dignitaries if they happen to be in town, and any other American diplomats overseas, support temporary assignments domestically and overseas. And we cover the entire state of North Carolina. North Carolina is divided into 3 different districts, Western, Middle, and Eastern District. From one end to another, it could take anywhere from 6 to 7 hours. So agents, 2 agents are assigned per district so that they can respond accordingly. And that's pretty much the kind of work that we do. Just like Kevin mentioned earlier, passport fraud and visa fraud that we're dealing with will ensure active risk management through monitoring the security environment, concurrent with our scope of duty and responsibility, and criminal investigation on our and which protect the integrity of U.S. issued passport, visa, and other identity documents throughout North Carolina. We also have a law enforcement working group that include the FBI, HSI, Secret Service, Marshal, U.S. Marshal, you name it, any law enforcement, ATF. If they happen to be working within North Carolina, we would be working together and dealing with any type of criminal investigation that related to any of our agency. that we can provide assistance to each other, as well as working on cases together with them. So that's pretty much the overall small office here. As Kevin mentioned earlier, we have 30 office field and resident offices, one overseas. I don't know if you call Puerto Rico is an overseas office, but it is part of the U.S. So we have that one office outside of our nation. So the overall office, the closest office, I guess, to UW-Madison or to Wisconsin would be Chicago field office. So if you happen to be in Chicago and you wanted to stop by and say hello to people over there, that would be the closest one for you to drive up to. That's pretty much what I have for now, and then I'll leave it for Q&A later.
Thank you so much, Tony. So that's given you an overview of the first two branches of the Diplomatic Security Service. For the final branch, I want to pass it over to Logan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to say hello to everyone. I'm a rookie compared to my other two DS colleagues, Kevin and Tony. Sorry if I'm a little slow. It is 2:22 in the morning in Cambodia. I am a 2009 graduate of University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a Minnesotan from a small town in Minnesota. I would imagine there's a few of you out there who are taking advantage of the reciprocity agreement between the two states. So hopefully there are some other Minnesotans out there as well. So I'm currently serving at the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. I arrived here about 4 months ago. It is a wonderful country in Southeast Asia, where it seems coronavirus has not really taken a strong foothold here in this country. I think they only have about 700 cases. So it's really nice to be able to live our lives pretty normally here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I worked at the law school for about a year and then joined the U.S. Army for 5 years, serving as a Russian linguist. I went to the Defense Language Institute to learn Russian. And then after that, decided to join the Diplomatic Security Service. This is my third tour overall. First tour was at the New York field office, which is located in Fort Lee, New Jersey, with satellite offices in Manhattan and JFK Airport out in Queens, New York. And after that, I served as an assistant regional security officer at the U.S. Embassy in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. And now here I find myself at the U.S. Embassy in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Although I was supposed to serve at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, Russia, unfortunately, I was a victim of the cold relations between the United States and Russia and never received my visa to serve there. But I am very happy to be here currently in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Kevin mentioned a lot about our overseas work. It's kind of the bread and butter of DS. We have representatives at every U.S. embassy overseas. As Kevin mentioned, we are the senior representatives to the ambassador and is advisor to all things related to security. I'm an assistant regional security officer, so I have a boss, a federal agent, DS agent, who's above me, who reports to the ambassador. However, what I will say is, even as a junior officer, I found myself in charge during a time of crisis in Kinshasa when our regional security officer had to depart the country. And the amount of responsibility you get, even as a junior officer with diplomatic security, is amazing sometimes. I worked in the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro with the golf team. That was probably the most fun I've had in my diplomatic security career. We managed 40 plus programs at embassies overseas. I'll just go through a few of them quickly. I know I don't have too much time, but physical security at the embassy, for example, we managed the local guard force, host nation police force that is near the embassy as well as the Marine security guards. Almost every embassy has a Marine security guard detachment. Embassy preparedness is a big thing for us in the Regional Security Office. We do mission-wide drills, which include drills related to weapons of mass destruction or white powder incidents. We do investigations. I don't think either Kevin or Tony mentioned so far. We have investigators who are overseas located within the consular section. I am not one of those, but we do have one here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, that investigate visa fraud and passport fraud. We also conduct internal investigations at the embassy. We have large local staff. Sometimes there's fraud that goes on at embassies, so we investigate that. As Kevin mentioned before, too, executive protection for the ambassador. Luckily, here in Phnom Penh, we have a bodyguard unit that we train. In Kinshasa, we had a brand new bodyguard unit that we stood up while I was there. We do security briefings for embassy personnel, for other American personnel that are located overseas too, that want to connect with the U.S. Embassy. Recently here in Phnom Penh, I did a walkthrough of the American school, so we have a very close working relationship with the schools overseas, making sure that all of the children who are in schools are safe. And then, of course, as Kevin mentioned, we do a lot of coordination with other law enforcement agencies. I'll give you an example. In Kinshasa and DRC, I worked very closely with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services protective detail when he wanted to visit Eastern DRC to visit an Ebola clinic. We worked with them very closely, and I didn't think I would ever be in an Ebola clinic, but I have done that. I've done many things in my DS career that I never thought I would do. I'm very proud to serve in this organization, and I look forward to taking some questions in a little bit. I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you all so much. That was fantastic information. I think you gave a great overview of this. I'll say it's a probably lesser known career option among students. So great to have you all to give a comprehensive view of all the different types of opportunities. Next, I want to pass it over to another alum who works as a Foreign Service officer and is also joining us from abroad. Lachlyn, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Emmeline. And hello, everybody from around the world. My name is Lachlyn Soper. I'm currently based in Leipzig, Germany, and I am a Foreign Service officer with the Department of State. It's great to see so many diplomatic security colleagues who are here, who are also Wisconsin alums. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and graduated with a degree in Asian studies, mainly because I studied abroad in Bali and wanted my credits to transfer. And so I'm here to talk about a career and my journey in the Foreign Service. So I want to start out by asking a question, and let's get to in the question of answers session. How many of you already know that you want a career in international relations? And it's okay if you're not. I certainly wasn't. I am from the smallest town in the poorest county in Wisconsin that has no stoplights. But I was born in Australia, and I had great mentors at the University of Wisconsin that said, hey, I think you should consider a job in or a career in international relations. Like many well-intentioned, want to be high-achieving kids coming out of the Wisconsin school system, I wanted to be a doctor. But in summer school, my freshman year, I took a class in international relations. And at the lab I worked at, I was talking to a postdoc about how much I enjoyed it. And he said, well, yes, Lachlyn, that's because international relations is easy compared to the chemical engineering degree that he had. Well, let me tell you, international relations is not easy. And today in this 4 minutes that I have the pleasure of sharing with you, I want to talk about 3 things. The first, my personal journey to join the Foreign Service and a path that many of you may want to follow. Second, I'd like to talk about how to join the Foreign Service. For many of you who are juniors and seniors, you want to start thinking about taking the test. And then third, I'll provide a general overview of the Foreign Service. So, and my foremost goal here is to encourage you to have a path in international relations, whether that be as a USAID employee, whether it be with the diplomatic security, or of course in the Foreign Service. So, as I mentioned earlier, UW made me pivot from not knowing what I wanted to do to pursuing a career in international affairs. My junior year, I did a National Security Education Program scholarship in Bali, a very academic study abroad. And I received a full scholarship to do that, to become an Indonesian speaker. After graduation, I did the JET program in Japan, and I moved and I became an English teacher for 2 years, also diligently studied Japanese. And then I moved to Egypt and I worked for an NGO. And at that time I thought, I've lived in a number of different countries. I like living in a number of different countries. I decided to go back to the United States. I got a master's degree from the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. And then I decided to study Arabic in Damascus. So the long story short of this is that I had a number of interesting experiences before the Foreign Service to live in different countries and to learn languages. You do not need to do that to join the Foreign Service. There are many programs and fellowships for students who would like to join right out of college, or you also have the option to join later. As Tony mentioned, he had worked in a refugee camp, utilizing his skills and experience before he became a diplomatic security agent. So there are many paths to joining the Foreign Service. And even then, after I graduated from grad school, the Army made me an offer I couldn't refuse to work as a civilian in Baghdad. I liked the can-do spirit of the Army. I married an infantry officer, but I really was not a fan of early morning exercise. So I decided to take the Foreign Service officer test. So that gets me to part 2. How does one join the Foreign Service? So the first thing you need to know is that there are many ways to join the Foreign Service. I happen to be a Foreign Service officer. We have diplomatic security agents. We have, there are Foreign Service personnel from government agencies such as Commerce, from the Department of Agriculture. We have USAID officers. So we have a varied presence overseas. So at our 265 missions around the world, that could be embassies, consulates, American presence posts, we have a lot of different people who sit at the table that tell the ambassador or the consul general or whoever's leading at that post, providing their perspective and making decision and implementing and defining and forming US foreign policy. So, but back to joining the Foreign Service, the Department of State Foreign Service. You can go to careers.state.gov. And for many of you who already have an interest in the Foreign Service, I recommend, or are just looking, that's a great way to start out. It's kind of your entree into the Foreign Service. And also I want to point out that you can join without a college degree. You can join as late as 55. In my introductory class in the Foreign Service, there were over 98 people in the 6-week orientation class, and the average age was 35. So it's a 3-step process. You take a Foreign Service officer test, that's an online test. You also submit a number of essays. And then third, you have a 4 to 6 hour oral exam that involves a number of different components. So I mentioned a little about third. I want to talk a little bit about the Foreign Service. And my tours have involved, I happen to be a political officer, but we have different cones. We have public diplomacy, economic officers, management officers, consular officers, and political officers for the Foreign Service officers in the Department of State. I'm a political officer, but I've done a range of different tours. I've served in Manila on the visa line, where I was giving visas to Americans who wanted to visit Disneyland or work as nurses or a number of different other careers. I served in Yemen and in fact was evacuated, and most of my stuff is still in Yemen. I also served in Stuttgart as a Department of Defense detail, where I was seconded to a different agency to work so we could have this interagency cooperation between two different agencies. I served back in Washington, and I was the special assistant in the European and Eurasian Affairs Bureau, which had me traveling to more than 20 countries around around Europe, accompanying my boss, the assistant secretary for that bureau. And now, one of the great things about the Foreign Service is that you can your full-time job can be learning a language. So I'm currently living in Leipzig, and I'm studying German full-time in preparation for my tour next year, where I will work at the consulate. And because the consulate has only 3 Americans working here in Leipzig, my job will range from working with my diplomatic security colleagues as the post-security officer, managing the local guard force, the people who protect our properties, to speaking to a number of high school students about the United States, or managing a program of visitors from Germany, from the former East Germany, who would like to travel to the United States, or focusing on the perspective of those living in this area, this part of Germany, and their perceptions of Russia, and how they feel about the anti-Putin protests that are taking place in Russia, but also locally here in the city center. So in short, I am very pleased with the career that I've chosen, having now worked for the Department of Defense, local NGOs, the United Nations for a time when I was in Damascus. I am incredibly satisfied with my job in the Foreign Service, and I love that we have this lifestyle of moving around. And yes, international relations isn't easy, but it's something that if you have a passion for, it certainly is fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lachlyn. I do think a lot of students kind of recognize the Foreign Service as an option in diplomatic careers, but you did a great job of illustrating just how much range there is even within that one career path and all of the different types of things that students could be involved in. So thank you so much for that. Last but certainly not least, I want to turn it over to our final panelist to talk more about USAID. Justin, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you very much. My name's DiVenanzo. I'm a service officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm calling from Kigali, Rwanda. It's not as late as my colleague in Cambodia. I am joined by my trusty sidekick, Covey. She'll probably not move at all during the next hour and a half that we have this conversation. I'll start off by just saying that I graduated Wisconsin in 2002 after a couple Rose Bowls and a Final Four appearance. After that, I went to Peace Corps in the Republic of Benin, where I worked in a small village, and it was actually the origin of voodoo in that West African region. Then I went to law school at Georgetown, realized I initially wanted to be a human rights lawyer, but then realized I needed to pay all of those bills. So I did corporate law for a little bit. And then after that, I joined USAID, which has a similar, but not quite the same way of entering as the Department of State. And we can go into those differences a little bit later in the Q&A session. I've served in Liberia, in Pakistan, in Rwanda now, and previously I was in South Africa in Pretoria, where I worked on the Power Africa initiative, which took me throughout all of sub-Saharan Africa. And I also did a stint in our office of the General Counsel in Washington for a bit. So USAID, for those who don't know, is the US government's lead international development agency. Work closely with our colleagues at MCC and DFC, where we operate in a global health, which includes the global health security space, education, pre-primary, primary, secondary, and then also workforce development. We do a lot of work in the democracy and governance space, which includes building CSOs and NGOs and media capacity. And we also do quite a lot of work in economic growth. In my mission where I work right now, I'm actually the acting deputy mission director, but normally I run our contracts and grants office. So a lot of people are surprised when they hear how USAID generally operates, and that is we are a contracting agency, and we provide a lot of the foreign assistance funds to international and local NGOs and sometimes commercial entities in a given state. In Rwanda, for instance, we give money directly to the government of Rwanda, and we work with those entities who actually lead the projects for us. So at USAID, you'll get technical experts in economic growth, private sector enterprise, education. You'll have folks who are lawyers, financial managers, auditors, and human resources. Like, it runs the gamut in terms of the interdisciplinary skill set that we have in any given mission. We work very, very closely with the interagency, our College Department of State, also DOD, because we use a lot of our development programming transactionally at times to achieve support. So quite exciting to work with folks who come from different backgrounds, who have different acumens, who have different experience. And it's been very interesting, especially in the last year and a half in Rwanda. Did I lose you though? My internet is a little wonky. Am I okay? All right, thank you for that. So what are the exciting things? I think USA.gov offers quite a lot of generalized information about how to apply. But what I can do in the Q&A or offline is walk people through why USA would be a great vocational opportunity. We do some very exciting stuff. Even though we do a lot of the contracts and grants, we are in the field when it's not a pandemic, and we are helping beneficiaries, either if it's organizationally or is the folks who are getting the benefit of HIV/AIDS commodities, to really improve their livelihoods, to really help the vulnerable who ordinarily would not get that kind of assistance that we are able to offer. It's also very exciting in terms of the development diplomacy that we're able to enact. We engage with high-level ministers and government officials on a regular basis. We work with the heads of all the other bilateral and multilateral institutions on a regular basis. And of course, we're using our skill set that we bring into USAID. It's a little different. Most people, if not all, come in with a master's degree or some sort of specialized degree. We have something called backstops, which is different than states, cones, or tracks. And most of those folks have a couple years of experience too. So our cohort's sometimes a little bit older, but it is, every day is rewarding. And then also, you have there's a cynical perspective about foreign assistance and what it can do. I'm sure there's some folks on this call who've read Lords of Poverty or have a thinking that maybe there are some challenges with how we effectively use taxpayer funds. And that is an exciting part of our job, is making sure that the money we're used is used effectively. And that can be a challenge. It requires folks with great experience and business judgment to make sure that money is actually going to the people who really, really need it. So I'll pause there and let us get to the most exciting part, which is Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And yes, we are ready to move into the Q&A portion. Students, if you have a question, feel free to stick it in the chat, or you can also raise your hand to be able to ask a question of our panelists. Panelists, whenever you want to answer a question, if you wouldn't mind using the raise your hand function, that would be really helpful for us, just to kind of minimize awkward silences and people talking over one another, as is, again, so common on any kind of these virtual meetings. So that would be really helpful for us. But I'm not seeing any student questions in the chat so far, or any hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with a question. Many of you have talked about these kind of long-term career paths, and your current roles aren't ones that you necessarily came to straight out of undergrad. So what I would really like to know is, how can students use their time right now, and even like post-grad, those first couple years straight out of undergrad? what are some opportunities or resources or options that they can look into that would lead to these career paths in the longer term. Lachlyn, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much. That's a great question, Emmeline. I think that if you're not sure about what you would like to study or to do for a career, that you should find something interesting and work very hard at it. And the book that I always reference is Grit by Angela Duckworth, that talks about the choose, and there's a line from here that I love to quote that says, choose something and work hard at it. Don't stop when it's hard. Stop after you have completed something. Move on to the next thing only then. And that could mean choosing a number of the opportunities that our colleagues on the panel have talked about, such as Justin joining the Peace Corps, or going to law school, or pursuing another postgraduate degree, or moving overseas, but really do that. Think of something that interests you in the here and now, and do that and do it full on. And the answers will come to you.
Thank you. That's great advice. Anyone else want to jump in? Tony, go ahead. Oh, Tony, I think you're on mute. Did you want to?
All right, sorry about that. Can everyone hear me okay? I couldn't seem to find the raise your hand sign somewhere, so I'm gonna do this if I needed to. I just want to piggyback on what Lachlyn was saying earlier. Personally, when I first, I have never heard of DS before, or even foreign service officer position at the State Department for that matter, during my time at UW-Madison or afterwards. I had, I spent 10 years, over 10 years working in the community refugee work, and also in San Jose with San Jose Police Department, but I have never heard of DS before. So for me, it was just sort of like a trip when I happened to be traveling in Thailand at one time, and I happened to stop by at the window and talk to one of the consular officers during my vacation in Thailand, and I have never heard of DS before. And I said I wanted to work. I wanted to go back and work in the sort of like refugee work and community work with with the U.S. government. And one of the consular at the window told me, "Have you heard of the DS? What's your background?" I told the individual at the time a little bit about it. And even when I was in college, my Bachelor of Science was in social welfare and criminal justice studies. So I had no idea, what DS, is doing or have been doing over the years. And during that visit to the embassy, I was able to talk to the consular, who happened to give me the sort of like the website of the DS and the State Department, and say, "Hey, Tony, why don't you check it out?" And the rest is history. And so what I'm trying to share with all students out there, don't think of it, currently you study in a certain, area where you feel like you're not qualified. You're probably not capable to be competing with, with a job at the diplomatic security or foreign service officer, because of the multiple layer of interviews and testing that you have to go through. Look at me. I mean, I have never thought about doing that, and I ended up here. So I guess, guys, it's the limit, and just follow your dream, whatever you would like to do. Look into government jobs, including State Department. In particular, there are so many jobs available within the department itself. So I would encourage them to continue to build on what they are studying at the moment, and then go from there.
That's fantastic advice. I think these careers can seem very intimidating from a student perspective. It's, you know, a long way to go. So I love that you're kind of talking about you don't have to know exactly what you want to do to be able to get started. And there are a lot of different types of experience that are really valuable. I think that's wonderful advice and will land for a lot of students. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm seeing some of the chat come in and I want to try to help answer some of these questions. So I'm in a little more of a unique position in that I worked for the diplomatic security recruitment for 2 years. I also did an out of cone to the Board of Examiners where I actually did those oral examinations that was referred to earlier for the FSO process. So I'm seeing some questions coming in about how to study for that. And I believe, you know, it's a very tough exam at the end of the day. And, you know, I spent upwards of 7-8 hours with the groups as they go through the oral interview process. But what I would recommend is even if you're on the fence with whether it's coming over to diplomatic security or one of the FSO cones, what you should really do is just look at the process and apply and try to take it. There's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of companies that'll help you study for it. But at the end of the day, if you go to that website, careers.state.gov, you can actually pull up, or I think if you type FSOT in your search engine, it'll pull up Pearson VUE. And that's the one company that initially issues the exam that you have to take online. But it has a study guide and it's probably like about 120 pages, and it will cover to the nth degree everything that you need to know about the exam. So I would recommend that you take a look at that. We develop fictitious countries that have to do with you know, having like a country team meet or you have a project that you have to work on. And a lot of these references that are made in the study guide are countries or examples that have been retired, and we're able to use those for the Foreign Service Officer exam. So it is very difficult, but you know, some people pass it on the first time. Some people it takes 2 or 3 times to get through. But at the end of the day, you know, if you have the will and the grit to push through, people will eventually get through to it. So again, regardless of whether it's with diplomatic security or as a Foreign Service Officer colleague, I would just encourage you when the vacancies do become available that you do that. And for the Foreign Service Officer exam, I think it's every 3 or 4 times a year. And again, you can go to that Pearson VUE website and it'll tell you how to register for it. But you should really familiarize yourself with it ahead of time. And one difference with diplomatic security is you actually have to have a 4-year degree. And it used to be you could apply, and then as long as you got your 4-year degree by the time you got hired. But now the hard rule is you have to be at least 21 and you have to have completed the 4-year degree. And just real quick with diplomatic security, the age limit is 37. However, if you have prior service, that prior service that you have will count to extend that that age limit. So we've had retired Army and Air Force come on that were in their late 40s because they retired, and because of the new law that was passed a few years ago, they were able to use that active duty time to retrograde that age limit. So I'll turn it back over to anyone else who would like to chime in.
Thank you, Kevin. That is great advice. Thank you for addressing kind of the application processes for these. I'll say overall, the government does tend to have some, we'll call them complicated application processes for these roles. And that is something that I can help with if students are interested in learning more about how to navigate those. I am one of the many resources at your disposal in kind of figuring out how to strategize that process. So do not hesitate to get in touch. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Justin. Please go ahead.
Great, and I'll be very quick. I would just, circling back to your initial question, the one thing that I recommend to anybody who wants to work in development or international affairs is go overseas. After college is a great time to do it because you don't necessarily have a lot of the liabilities or constraints that will keep you from going. Go someplace that challenges you, work for an NGO, work for any internship you can get. The Department of State, USAID, any of the other foreign affairs agencies have great internships. Some of them are paid. I think a lot of them are paid. And those are wonderful opportunities, not only just to build a network for getting these jobs, but also just experience and see if you like it. If you like overseas, I think there was one question about, do you have to be overseas? That's a good thing to know about yourself before you pursue a career in this field. And I'll stop there just so we can get to the other questions.
Thanks, Justin. I'm really glad that you brought up internships because there is actually somebody else on this call that I think can speak to that element of, getting this type of experience as a student. Julia, would you care to hop on and talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a VSFS intern, which stands for Virtual Student Federal Service. So I'm not directly an intern for the Department of State, but my internship is completely virtual. So if you guys were looking for something to do right now that you could maybe do during next school year, I would definitely research that. They have projects. They call them projects, but they're basically internships. So as an intern, you're assigned a project and you carry that out through the 9 months of the school year. And they have them through all different, there were ones for the Department of State, the Department of Defense, all different federal governments. So it is virtual. So that's still something that you could do to kind of get that feel for government work to see if it's even something that you like. And then if it is, then you can research further Department of State internships. As was said, there are tons of opportunities for those internships and some of them are even abroad.
Thanks so much, Julia. And Mike did put the link to that VSFS program into the chat. Applications for that will open up July 1st through July 31st. So definitely, if you're interested in a virtual internship for the upcoming school year, something to keep in mind. There are some other internships that Justin mentioned as well. Mike will go ahead and put those in the chat. Again, some of them have some pretty complicated application processes, which in the end is probably just good practice if you're interested in getting into any of these other career fields. Good to get practice navigating some of those more complicated government processes. All right, so now I want to go ahead and turn it over to a couple of our students who have their hands up waiting to ask a question. William, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. I'm also calling in from all places, Leipzig, Germany. So I've got a question for Lachlyn for you. I see other people have already asked about specifics of the Foreign Service exam test, so I'll just keep it to what kind of language resources would you recommend specifically? I think many of us have been experiencing, whether you're in the US or not, that it's very difficult with English being a world language that, it's hard to kind of immerse yourself. And I was just wondering what you did besides studying in Damascus or in Egypt or other places to kind of further your knowledge.
William, my fellow Leipziger, it's great to see you online, and I'd be happy to meet you for a virtual coffee sometime, or when this lockdown finally ends in Germany, to see you in person. That is a great question, and you said that English, as English speakers, we have a blessing and a curse, and that many people understand us, and many people speak better English than whatever language we're studying. So my suggestion is that you live in a rural area or live in a place like Leipzig if you're studying German, where a lot of people do not speak very good English and you work very hard. People talk about whether they're good at languages or not. I think that you can have a knack, but let's face it, languages are a lot like, there are a lot of FaceTime with workbooks and flashcards and memorizing vocabulary and memorizing grammar and watching TV and being very diligent about that study in the initial stages. And then you get to a level, right, where people understand you, but maybe you're not grammatically correct. And then you realize you need to go a little bit further where you're speaking like a native speaker would speak, or you have a goal of speaking in a way that where you sound like an educated native speaker. And that, again, that level right there is the hardest level to get from. Because people are polite, right? We don't want to tell someone that they're speaking incorrectly, but they may understand you. And to get there, again, that takes work. That takes a friend, maybe a long-haired dictionary. Love is a great way to learn a language, right? Where you have those moments where someone can be honest with you, or a close friend that can tell you how your language is going. But I do want to go back to the grit quote, but it requires a lot of work. let's all face it too, that language involves a little bit of, I would say, maybe not making a fool of yourself, but really putting yourself out there and speaking in a language that maybe you don't sound so intelligent in. I have a 5-year-old daughter who's sleeping very close to me and could be at any moment come up and join this conversation. And of course she speaks better German, French, and sometimes English than I do. And that we have to be ready to sound not great for the purposes of achieving a language fluency.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely feel that as one of my first times in Germany, I messed up Rückenschmerzen and Regelschmerzen, which is the difference of back pain and having menstrual cramps. So, you're definitely able to make some stupid mistakes. I feel that, but
Indeed.
Thanks for the advice.
My pleasure.
Thank you both. That was a great question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just jump in. Just because I was a Russian linguist in the military. I just want to give you a couple of resources and give one more pitch for diplomatic security, because just like foreign service officers, we are able to go to language training as well prior to a lot of our assignments. I went to 6 months of French before my assignment in Kinshasa, and actually just did about 4 more months in Russian. There's actually a good website you can look at, the Defense Language Institute's GLOSS. If you look that up, there's a lot of practice in many different languages. It's Defense Language Institute. It's located in Monterey, California, but they have different assignments you can do that help you figure out where your score is at. All scores for languages are rated. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that definitely will help you. It's a Department of Defense thing, but the State Department uses a very similar system to get their language score results.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you both. That is great advice and some great resources. I think it does also lead into one of our questions from the chat that is about other kind of skills. So I would be curious if any of our other panelists have thoughts on, what skills, either technical or core or soft skills, you feel are most essential and most beneficial in your careers. Okay. Any of our panelists care to take this one? Kevin, go ahead.
I can go ahead and chime in just a little bit, particularly when it comes to the Foreign Service Officer exam. So there's dimensions that you will be graded against, and you should take a look at those and make sure that you are aware what those dimensions are, so that you can do the exam a whole lot better. But I just wanted to back up real quick. I had my hand up earlier, just a little bit about the language, to just let you know that it's not required that you speak a foreign language when you come in. As was already mentioned, we will teach you the language that you need to know, and there's different ways to go through it. Just like with Lachlyn is in country studying. When I did Spanish, after a few months, they let me go down to Guatemala and be immersed, and I was able to do law enforcement language training versus the usual FSI, which teaches you kind of the political officer or the the cocktail conversation of how to speak the language. But also, if you do have a language and you're fairly good at it, if you do make it to a certain point through the Foreign Service Officer exam, you are able to go to FSI, and you can do it virtual and take an exam in that language. And if you pass, they will award you additional points, and then that will put you on a higher tier with your competition, really, at the end of the day, because everybody gets a score based off of that oral exam that ends up deciding where you're going to be placed. And different cones, I think political is probably the hardest one to get into. So you really have to score very, very hard in that area. So I have colleagues that are foreign service officers that have told me they weren't satisfied with their political score. They ended up going through the entire process, very, very cumbersome, just to get a higher score so that they could rank on it. So again, very specific to the Foreign Service officer, I would really recommend looking at what that guide is, because it really does go into the nth degree of everything that you need to bring to the table with that. And more specific, so the difference between the Foreign Service officer and diplomatic security or the specialist. So there's the generalist track, and then there's the specialist. And the specialist track is a little bit different of how you're hired. And the specialists are hired because they're bringing a specialty into the field. Similar like with computer experience or backgrounds, that you're bringing a degree into that area that helps out. Although for diplomatic security, it's a little more general, because you could be a police officer, or you could be military, or you could be neither and still come on with diplomatic security. So that's kind of the difference a little bit between the generalists and the specialists. But again, that is categorized when you go to the website for careers at state.gov. It'll tell you about the generalists and the specialists. And somebody made a comment earlier, like, do you have to travel? So no, we also have civil service positions that are basically based here in Washington. On occasion, there could be detail opportunities for them to go work at an embassy, or they can transition. But we also have that within diplomatic security. We are skill set 2501 federal law enforcement, which is for the Foreign Service, but we also have 1811 1811 law enforcement officers, which is the same category as FBI, DEA, ATF, and they are civil service, and they just stay domestic, although they could probably move domestic to other offices if they wanted to. So yes, you can kind of join the Foreign Service, but still be domestic, because the requirement is that we're the Foreign Service, so the expectation is that you are going overseas. And Congress mandated that you cannot be domestic any longer beyond 8 years. So literally every 8 years, you have to go back overseas again. Although you will find most people join the Foreign Service because they want to be overseas. And one challenge that I think was made earlier too is go to those challenging countries, and you will find that they are the most rewarding. If you go to London or Paris, you may be a little bit disappointed. My wife is also a Foreign Service officer, former Peace Corps volunteer as well. And we felt that the countries that have served us best are those ones that are in the more developing countries, Swaziland, Uganda. Bosnia is fairly developed, but also with its challenges. And we also found that it's the most cohesive in the embassy community as well. And we loved every moment of it. But enough of me on my soapbox, so I'll turn it back over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Kevin. That was great advice. Speaking of, challenging countries, I do want to pass it over to Justin. I know you have something to add here.
Very quickly about the question concerning skills that could set you apart from other people. And I would just highly recommend, or I'll just note that the folks who can write very well and speak very well, who can sit in a meeting with a large group or small group, but be able to articulate what our objectives are in that meeting, be able to understand the nuances of cross-cultural communication, are able to work cross-culturally with folks. And any embassy around the world is going to require an ability to listen and to understand the context of where you're operating. And just being able to have a few of those key skill sets, I think would make you successful.
Thank you. That's a really great point. Next, I want to, Tony, go ahead.
I just noticed that somebody had a question about, is it a 9-to-5 job or something? Is that still a question out there? I just like to make a comment about it. I'm sure our USAID officer, Foreign Service officer, and DS, we all know that when working domestically or overseas, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's pretty much You got to be ready, especially for us, DS agents, security. We are the security officer for the embassy or the consulate. Pretty much, if anything happened related, any security related question, pretty much you get the call. You get a phone call in the middle of the night when one of your, I guess, staff happened to be out there late and get caught by the local police or something, and you get that phone call, or the consular officer who are on duty on that night happen to receive the phone call, and then we'll pass it over to you. You know, that sort of thing. So I say that be flexible when you work overseas, even domestically. I mean, you have to be ready that the job sometimes requires you to respond when you have to respond, even in the middle of the night. Thank you. Good question.
Very good question. Do any of our other panelists want to talk about the work-life balance? We've had a few questions come up about that, so I want to make sure if we have any other thoughts, we can get to those before moving on. Okay. Not seeing any other panelists for that one, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anne, who has a question she would like to ask.
Yes, I was just wondering, because I can assume that like basically uprooting your life and moving across the world multiple times isn't that easy. So logistically, what kind of lessons have you learned about how you should plan or what you should bring if you're basically going to have to uproot your entire home for 2 years or so and then go to another place?
It's a really great question. Any of our panelists want to take a first stab at this one?
I'll take it if no one else wants to chime in. The first key thing is probably just downsize. All right, so like the U.S. government will allot you up to 7,000 pounds for foreign service officer or employee traveling overseas. But what you find is that and I was 12 years in a row overseas, so we moved five times so that's just to back up real quick. Every 2 years, you're probably going to end up moving. There's some posts like Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, a few others that are only 1 year, and there's occasional, like the job that I'm in right now is 3 years just because of the training requirement up front. But what ends up happening is people just really accumulate a lot of stuff, and then the government pays to have it moved, and then it just gets moved from one place to another. So really downsize and prioritize what really matters to you at the end of the day. And most houses or residences are furnished, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. Your vehicle will be shipped for you as well. And look, under the management column, they have an entire office that will help you do everything that you need to do for all of your moves. But the priority, you know, if you have family members as well, just make sure that there's two ways to pack. There's what's called your UAB, which is up to 500 pounds, and that will ship immediately to your post. So if you have kids, you want to make sure that all the things for your kids are included in that. And then there's the shipment that'll take, you know, another 2 or 3 months before it reaches you. So you're gonna have to learn to live out of a suitcase a little bit for the first few weeks. And here's another difference when I was talking about the difference between living in a developing country and living in Rome or Paris. So you still get the same allotment for your residence, regardless of whether you're in Rome or in Swaziland. So if you're in Rome and it's based off of your rank or grade, you may get a 1-bedroom or two-bedroom apartment. But that allotment of funds in Africa, every place that I lived in Africa, I had a massive house and a backyard bigger than I could use for my wife and I. In fact, in Swaziland, it even had a pool, which is a rarity and a blessing in disguise, to be honest. But the one thing in the long term to really think of, and it's mostly for those who start off single in their career and then they end up getting married and then they end up having children, is this eventually catches up with you where now you have children or your kids are teenagers and they're in high school and they want to stay in school. And what some folks have opted to do, like let's say you're in Frankfurt, Germany, and your kid's in his last 2 years of high school and you don't want to move, there's an arrangement that can be made that the family and the spouse stay there, and then you go to Afghanistan or Iraq for a year, and then you can come back. So you're going to start finding that how you adapt as a single person in this career will vastly change how you adapt once you have a partner or spouse, and how that impacts their careers as well. So usually at about the 10-year mark, this will start to impact people, particularly if your spouse or partner also has a fulfilling career for them as well. And sometimes both can match up, and it worked out for my wife and I because she is also a foreign service officer. So I hope that answered the question, and some of my other colleagues who are married can chime in as well.
Yeah, Justin, take it away.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think, okay, I'll be quick. I think Kevin handled a lot of the logistical questions. And I think what was good about the question we heard is that it can take us in some interesting directions about how hard it is to transition, especially at those different phases of your life. You know, when I was 30, when I transitioned over, and that's when, and I was single, and that's when all of my friends were starting their families, right? And they were doing their own adventures. And that first tour is hard, right? Because your friends are doing their own thing and you're having fun, but you're having your own adventures, but your whole network is living their own lives without you. And then you transition, you meet someone, which can be challenging overseas. You know, it's not like, well, meeting people in the pandemic is difficult, but it is challenging to meet folks sometimes overseas. And then when you do, I think Kevin's point about how you arrange careers can be very, very difficult. I think the embassies do a great job of creating spousal employment, but is it exactly what that person's dream job was? Maybe not, right? So that you can see how that creates some potential tensions. And then you have kids. And I have little kids now, so I'm not at that school phase quite yet. But I think that point about, you know, you sometimes have to transition them very frequently in their lives where there are other friends that they get to know back in the US, same community, same school, same camp. And it gets harder and harder for kids to transition. And it's not like they get to stay in that school, you know, always for 4 years or 3 years or whatever school it is. And I think you can't underestimate that. But you can't underestimate some of the extraordinary gifts you get from living overseas, the incredible people you meet, the incredible adventures and experiences that these children, you are going to accumulate. So there are for sure trade-offs. And I think the moving is something that requires a lot of those 13 traits that one needs to exemplify in the foreign service exam. I forgot what they were. But I think just recognizing that there's going to be difficulties, but the upside is so sweet that it's a career definitely worth checking out. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Justin. Tony, did you have something to add too?
Yeah, I think it's very common for all of us. I think including people who have never joined State Department as a foreign service officer or even DS agent or USAID for that matter. I think we all, you know, always thinking about, okay, once I get the job, is that the end of it? It's something that we all have to take into consideration. And I think that's a very valid question that one of the students raised, brought it up. I think including up to now, even my family members and friends who I happen to see them after every couple of years, they ask that same question, how do you do that? You know, just keep going 2-3 years and then coming back home, and you know, how do you you know, bring up your family, well, your children if you have any kids? And in fact, one of my daughter was born overseas when I was serving in Shanghai, China. And I think from looking, if you compare positive and negative aspect of the job itself, I think if you really enjoy doing what you're doing, and it takes two, that means you and your wife, have to be committed to it. Because if one person, for some reason, during that time, short time, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, one person decided to tap out and say, I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore. So now at that time, you have to make a decision whether you should continue on or however you want to do it, especially nowadays with the new 8 years, allowing you to work domestically. I think that had helped a whole lot of foreign service officers, including diplomatic security agents. So I think that's a very valid question, and that needs to be asked, and that needs to be considered and taken to sort of like take it seriously and discuss with all people involved before you make a decision. Otherwise, you later on, you might end up being divorced just because one person is not happy, and you don't want to put yourself or your family in that situation, and you have to deal with it. So.
Thank you.
That's a great point. Thanks, Tony. All right, I think we might be moving on to one of our very last questions of today. Isabella, I've seen you have your hand raised. Please go ahead whenever you are ready.
Yeah, well, actually, you guys did a pretty great job at answering this question that I had, but I suppose I could just ask it and see if anybody else had anything to add on. But as somebody who grew up within the foreign service community, I just kind of wanted to ask how managing a family or like personal life was as somebody in the workforce, because I know that like being a foreign service kid, I was really used to moving around a lot. But I guess my question is how it is managing like having those kids and having them be involved in like cultural practices that you might not be able to, if that makes sense.
Lachlyn, I know you've talked about this in some of the other panels we've been able to have you on. Would you like to kick us off?
Sure, but I think Isabella, you may have some feedback or some insights to provide as growing up in the foreign service community. I will say that I think it's a gift to be able to grow up without having to spend face time with textbooks learning languages, and that's something that I've tried to give to my daughter, who's currently 5 and is again equally speaks German, French, and English. I think that there can be tremendous again opportunities like Justin and Kevin talked about, and also Tony, but there can also be challenges. For example, I've spent half of my marriage apart from my husband, who's an Army officer in the infantry, and he's currently serving as a battalion commander in South Korea, and I'm here in Germany. So I think that there's, this career isn't for everybody, and you have to determine what makes it work and what you need to move forward to. But I also want to put in a plug for places like, the Romes and the Parises and the Londons of this world may be nice, but there's also a lot of really good diplomacy that are taking place here, and they're family-friendly places as well. And on the political side of the house or the economic side, the U.S. relationship with the European Union accounts for 1/3 of global economic power. So trade. So there's a lot of real diplomacy going on, and there's a lot of jobs in Europe that make it easy. For example, I chose Germany as a job because I wanted my daughter to continue to learn German and to go to a German kindergarten. And I also want my husband, who's an Army officer, to be one of the 35,000 military personnel that we have in Germany. So again, Isabella, I think you would have a lot to offer here, but there's again tremendous opportunities here, and also, of course, tremendous challenges, especially when you have 2 careers and you're trying to make those orbits come together.
Thank you, Lachlyn. That was really some great advice. Kind of in that line, and also because we are running low on time, I would love to hear from some of our panelists. What are kind of the next steps that students can take now to continue looking into these many, many, many options that are out there in diplomacy? Is networking something that happens in these fields? If so, how can students do that? Are there other events or resources that they should take advantage of? Just kind of next steps.
Emmeline, I'd be happy to foot stomp careers.state.gov to learn more about careers in diplomatic security and of course the wide range of careers that one can have in the Foreign Service. And I mentioned this briefly, but the National Security Education Program is a great resource for undergrads who would like to study abroad, as well as for those who are looking into a master's degree that can pay for your entire experience overseas, learning a language or studying abroad in a country outside of Western Europe. That program I did, a graduate scholarship in Bali, and then of course, and then in Damascus, I did a fellowship. And that was great for my language, and I think moving forward, and it's something you can do while you're a student. There's a number of other fellowships out there to look at as well. Careers.state.gov has them, but there's the Fulbright program, of course, Peace Corps. Specifically for joining the Foreign Service, there are a number of fellowship programs. There's the Wrangell Fellowship Program, Pickering Fellowship programs that can pay for your graduate education as well and give you a sort of direct line into the Foreign Service if that's a career path that you're interested in. So I think that you should start researching it. And the fact that you're participating in this panel that Emmeline has so kindly arranged and for you is a good start, that start looking around and doing research into your options. I'd be happy personally to feel free to reach out to me. I've talked to a number of students. I see some familiar faces here on this panel. If you'd like to have a phone conversation or an email about the Foreign Service or a career in international affairs, please do reach out to me. I'm happy to help. On Wisconsin, go Badgers.